2014 Duramax LML came in with reductant fluid quality on the dash, was going to go into limp mode, or actually was in limp mode, had these 3 codes in there, and I looked it up. There's a TSB that includes these top 2 codes but not the bottom code, and it wants you to leak check the air induction system here, and here's the list of codes that it supports. Like I said, those top 2 codes are in there, and they want you to use a high pressure smoke machine and make sure that the air intake is all good. Well, I hooked up the low pressure smoke machine and didn't find any leaks, and I looked up the freeze frame data and I noticed that it had this PID, induction system leak indication. It was to 0.67 to 1. I thought that was quite off, and so I found out what that actual PID meant and on the internet. And if you look at this code, which it did not have this code, but if you type this in on all data, it gives you a test, and it's talking about the air induction system and how it uses the mass airflow sensor to estimate if it's got a leak in the system. And it wants you to look at that PID while the engine's idling, command the EGR to 0%, which I did, and observe that PID should be between 0.8 and 1.2, and so I did that, and it was a perfect 1.01. It was absolutely perfect. This was when it was cold. It wasn't warmed up or whatnot, but it was right on the money, and I gave it some throttle. It stayed on the money. I didn't give it much throttle, and then I went ahead and commanded the EGR valve open, and as I would increase pulse width modulation, it would fall from 1.01 and it'd keep falling. I maxed it out, and then it kicked me out of the test. So I went back to the test and was going back over it, and at 0% command I was now at 0.29. So it went from 1.01 to 0.29 after kicking me out of the test, even though I was still at the same percentage of 0% pulse width modulation. So that pretty much showed me that there's probably the EGR valve had stuck open and was causing our problem here. So I pulled, it's just 2 bolts here for the EGR pipe. You can pull this up. I put a little socket in here so I can stick my borescope down in there. And I'll show you on the functional test, when I command this thing on, you'll see it'll open up. I mean, when I took this off, it was actually closed. And so then I put my borescope in there and I would energize the EGR, and it would slowly come out to about 40%. And it'd stop. Any more percentage I give it, it would stay in that position. But it was a decent amount open, about 1/2 inch open. And then when I would pull back and go to 0%, the valve would never move at all. It would stay in that position. I'd take a hammer and start tapping on the EGR valve, and then it would spring back. So I wasn't sure if maybe the spring was broken, or the valve is just gummed up, like it's not that dirty, or if maybe the motor is not getting reverse polarity. I didn't know exactly how this worked, so I went to the wiring diagram, and there's only 5 wires that go to that EGR according to the diagram here, and you can see that the 2 power wire, it just says EGR motor low and high. So it's not like it's reversing the polarity. Those should stay. This should be the ground and this should be the positive. So it's only powered open, and it's got a spring return, which is how most or every EGR on a diesel I've ever seen works. So you can see the other 3 wires are just a potentiometer. So here we're on our exhaust gas recirculation test. We're at 0%. Look at our valve. It's closed. Now I'm going to increase the EGR. We're at 10, 20, 30, 40. See, it didn't change there. 50, 60. I'm going to go ahead and start backing it down because they don't go any more than that. 40, 30, 20, 10, 0. See how it's still open? I'm going to tap the EGR valve. There it goes. It closed. So that EGR valve is sticking open, which is causing it to misread on the mass airflow sensor, and that's messing with the emission system, causing those codes. Always make sure to check your air filter. If it's clogged, it's going to cause all sorts of emissions issues with the diesel exhaust after treatment system. There was a guy on IATN which also had this same exact problem with even a new EGR sticking on him, so he had to replace it twice. And then in the bottom here, this one guy did say to make sure to check the intake air temperature too, which the all data tells you to do that under the code test for that P101 or whatever that code was, but it uses that to estimate airflow through the engine. So just make sure that that's reading right, and all your other PIDs, of course, are correct as well. So just to reiterate, if you have these codes, make sure to check your freeze frame and check this leak ratio. If it's off, you're going to be looking for leaks in the intake system, bad mass airflow sensor, stuck EGR valve, but something on the air supply is going to be wrong. So here's a brand new AC Delco EGR valve. I'm going to command it, and notice how 10% does not open, 20%, 30%, 40, 50. So basically it made all of its change at 20, so that's normal apparently. And I'm going to go back down here where 10 again, you can see it does not retract. 0, it slowly pulls back. Just one more time to compare with the old one. We have 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. I'm going to start going back down. 50, 40, 30, 20, 10, 0. As you can see, it's stuck open. I have to put my fingers back in here, and I feel a little pop in it. It pops back. So now they do have a cleaning procedure for the EGR valve, but they're not too expensive, so we're going to use a new one. So here's that PID with the new EGR valve. Keep in mind the engine is still cold. You're supposed to do this test when it's warm, but it failed when it was cold last time, very obviously. So as you can see, we're within the 80 to 120% range, and as I increase EGR to 10%, 20%, there you go. You see how it drops down? It's almost in the 20s. That's where it was stuck when it was at 0% with the old valve. You know, it started at 1.0 and then went down, and then as I went back to 0 command, it stayed stuck. But this one, as you can see, returns to where it should be. So the valve is fully returning. There's 20% again. There you go. Looks like the problem's fixed.